welcome back to the Artistic Vision. Just noticing that Gary and I are both wearing these nice felt hats.
We're
very stylish.
All out today.
That's right. We have special guests today, Claude Atcho, who's a priest in Charlottesville, Virginia. He's the author of Reading Black Books, How Reading African American Literature Makes Us More Just and Whole, or Whole or Just, I can't remember. But he's a pastor, a writer. He's also coming out with a book this year, a devotional book from Multnomah, and just a great source of inspiration. We talk about his journey with literature, how he arrived at kind of being formed by it. And we also, because we are very trendy, we talk a little bit about Kendrick Lamar. And this was, I think, before I even knew he was going to be the halftime show of the Super Bowl. So talk a little bit about hip hop. Claude and I are editing a book that we're hoping to turn in the next couple weeks on theology and hip hop. And tune in for that.
Yeah, I really appreciated him addressing like why is it important to listen to hip hop, like the storytelling instrument and offering insight into the community. I just thought it was really insightful, and it was providential that Kendrick Lamar would be in the forefront of our news pages and stuff like that right now. It's really helpful. I think people will find it interesting.
We are very hip. People, very, very hip. We know what's going on in the world.
No mistake.
All right, well, here he is, Claude Atcho. All right, welcome to the Artistic Vision, Claude Atcho. Good to have you with us.
Great to be with y'all.
So the first question we ask every guest is this one: what's your background with beauty? And so, were you raised in a home that kind of appreciated the arts? Did you arrive at an appreciation for literature or poetry or visual arts later? What was the process like for you?
I think the process for me, especially tied to literature, I just have great memories of going to the library. I love being at the library, love going there, would always like come back with tons of books and then just would sort of like lay them out on the floor next to my bed and do like weird stuff like read 5 pages of this book and then, okay, now 5 pages of this next book, and then the next one. I just enjoyed books. So I think that was sort of my way into appreciation of the arts. And, obviously at that time, especially, just being interested in stories that were captivating. So I think that's all, speaks to an aspect of beauty. So I would say, just my mom's encouragement to enjoy books, to learn, to be curious and to pursue, knowledge and story through the written word was really pivotal for me.
When you talk about reading a few pages and putting it down, reading a few more, it sounds like my current reading habits still today.
So childish.
It's so childish. Explains the pile that never seems to go down.
Right.
My next question was going to be about what drew you to literature, but you kind of covered that. I'm curious maybe then to go to like, who were some of the earlier authors that you remember? Maybe as a kid or as a teen. Where's your memories go?
Totally. I have great memories of Fridays coming out of school and being hyped up to have, a new batch of Encyclopedia Brown books and just have those ready to come home and see if I could figure out the mystery before he did. So this kind of a classic mystery series folks may be familiar with. So I remember enjoying those. I also remember my teacher, either 5th grade or 6th grade, Mr. G, he gave me Ender's Game, the sci-fi novel by Orson Scott Card, I believe is the right order for each of his names. And that was just that just drew me in. I devoured that, read the next one, and so forth. So those were a couple like, crystallized stories that had a big impact on me, that really drew me in. I'm thinking Walter Dean Myers, maybe around 7th or 8th grade, great African-American writer who wrote a ton of stuff, but I'm thinking in particular his book that's sort of like a novel and a screenplay called Monster. I was really captivated by that. He's got one about a kid kind of growing up as a basketball star, but then gets kind of caught in the mix of gambling called Slam. That was another one that really drew me in. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred Taylor. So those are some of the titles that I really remember enjoying. And at the same time, like, stuff like James and the Giant Peach, Roald Dahl, and that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
I was a lot of good things. I feel like my teachers did a great job of just pointing us to good stuff that was interesting, and then there were a few just recommendations that kind of got my wheels going, book wise.
Nice.
And so you wrote this book, your first book, Reading Black Books, which is about African American literature specifically. Tell us a little bit about that book, how it happened, and why the focus on African American literature.
Yeah, so it's probably coming up from my story. Just I love books and literature, and so in college I thought I would study business because that's how you make money, and I just could not hack it through the business calculus class, and just barely got out alive. And so I realized, I'm just going to need to study, something I'm interested in, something I care about. Otherwise, this just is not going to work for me. And so I thought, I'm going to study English literature. So that's what I did. I had great teachers. I went to school at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, about 2 hours north of Seattle. I had great teachers. I really enjoyed my first few classes. I think one of my first classes was actually Chicano literature and American literature, a couple things that got my just really grabbed my attention. And then some of my favorite courses were centered on African American literature. And so as I was studying literature, I was really enjoying these things, growing in my understanding. At the same time, I was also really getting back to church for the first time, kind of like on my own. So both of these interests, both of these important pieces of who I am were starting to really develop at the same time, which then they intersected when I had just questions in my mind after class. We'd read a great novel or have a good discussion, and it would be stimulating. And then I was sort of wondering, well, what does this mean for me as a Christian? What does this mean for me as a disciple? And I didn't really have anybody to talk about that with. So I was sort of like left to think about that in my head, and I didn't have a lot of ideas, and so that just always stuck with me. And fast forward to entering into pastoral ministry several years down the line, 2020, COVID hits, all this sort of stuff. And I found myself, kind of at home for several months, and just thought, well, maybe I should write a little bit about, this interest that I have in African American literature and how it can form us as disciples, as Christians. And it was a chance for me to try to not resolve, but more positively, like work out an answer to this question that I had had since, my undergrad and grad school studies. And so that's really where the book came from. Some of the context, obviously 2020, there were so many conversations about race, justice, systemic sin, all of these things. And I felt like, African American writers have been speaking about these sort of questions for a long time. And it felt to me that the church would be well served to really explore these texts and maybe find some robust answers and some challenging questions for us, inside of these stories. So that was sort of the genesis for the book.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're involved in pastoral ministry. You're a priest, right?
Yes. Yep.
Anglican Church. Yeah. How would you just stepped into it a little bit there, but how would you say literature has influenced your ministry, or how does it help you as a priest?
Yeah, I think I think literature, because obviously, because it's dealing with story, because it's dealing with just complications of being a person in the world, and all the intricacies of that. It's helped me to just understand that people are complicated, and to be patient with people, and to know that there is more behind the person and the story than the snippet of interaction that maybe I've had or what I've seen. And I think literature has helped me with that, just because in reading a novel, the story and the characters are unfolding slowly, and you have to be patient. And you got to go along for the ride and the journey, and the author's taking you somewhere, but it's sort of this unfolding. So I think in that way, literature has helped me. Maybe I'm not where I need to be, but it's helped me to become, more patient with people and their stories, and to know that people really are works in progress, and there's so much more to us than the interaction that maybe I've had with somebody that I've known just for 2 weeks because they've come on 2 Sundays and they seem really put together, but who knows everything that they're carrying. And I think literature has helped me to be open to the recognition that people contain a lot, and hopefully I'll get to walk with them on that journey.
Yeah.
Good. It's beautiful. Yeah, one of the things that stuck out to me in reading Black Books was, I think the story, it made me read a lot of books that I hadn't read yet.
Mm,
Like I'm thinking of like Invisible Man, right?
mm,
It's kind of it's a dark story in some ways. And so, how would you maybe talk about, it seems like that's a dark story, but
hmm
Christianity is positive. How do
mm,
you reconcile like these darker stories, or even like non-Christian authors, right? James Baldwin, or
hmm
these people who don't identify as Christian mainly. Um, how does the Christian faith impact that reading practice for you?
mm. I mean, I think, sometimes for Christians, we can, it depends on our context, depends on some of our disposition. Um, but sometimes we can we can kind of have like a overrealized eschatology and kind of like pretend everything's great. And so I think some of these stories that are really challenging or really troubling, they just remind us of the truth that we know, that the world is a fallen place. And so I think some of those authors really help us to recognize that, because I have to confess, even personally, it's really easy for me, even where I live, to sort of just kind of be around people that have it put together and be kind of move in circles where, like, hey, the biggest problem in our lives is like, um, some event we wanted to go to got postponed or canceled. It's very easy. Like at a certain point, if you've achieved, air quotes success, you can just kind of live pretty comfortably, and that's sort of the American dream in some ways, right? To kind of escape anything that might put you in the line of discomfort. And so I think literature, that something like Invisible Man, that's really dealing seriously with sin personally and systemically, though it won't use that language, but dealing with discrimination, dealing with violence, it just reminds you this is real life. And this is real life for most people in most places over the course of of most of history. And
Mm,
if I look close enough to my own story, I realize, oh yeah, this is actually a part of my story too, even though I may
mm,
try to paper over that. So I think, literature that's difficult, we have to, use wisdom and prudence and follow our conscience. But I think wisdom that's difficult, it reminds us of the truth that's part of our faith. It's not the whole of our faith, but just the recognition of like, yeah, the world is a place in which sin and death do have a reign in a sense. And we have to recognize that. And I think it's from that recognition that we also find in literature, think of something like Invisible Man, how people try to cope with that. So how are people trying to find a sense of purpose in the midst of a world that is really painful and hard to exist inside of? I think of one great example in Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. It's basically an unnamed protagonist searching for identity in the 1940s or so. Starts in the South and then goes to the North. A young black guy, and he has this moment where he gets what he thinks are a series of letters of recommendation for a job in New York. And he sort of holds the letters up in front of himself, in front of a mirror, and it's sort of, the scene is kind of like he's swelling with a sense of pride and purpose and dignity. But little does he know those letters of recommendation are actually not what he thinks they are. And it's this really powerful moment, I think, if you read it from a Christian perspective, because if we believe, as our faith teaches, that we're made in the image of God, he could just look in the mirror and have a sense of dignity just by seeing his own reflection. He doesn't need the letters. He doesn't need
mm,
any achievement. He doesn't need any recognition for other people. He could just, if he just knows that he's made by God and loved by God, he has all the dignity that he needs.
mm,
And yet he doesn't grasp that. So I think a Christian reading of that story kind of sees the darkness, but also sees, oh, here are these points in which the truth of the gospel, the truth of our faith, would actually be transformative. So I think that sort of reading, doesn't say Ellison as up to a Christian project, right? He's
sure.
doing his own thing. But I think when we bring the lens of our faith to literature as one lens on top of the literary lens, I think those sort of things really come to the fore, and they can really help us, strengthen us personally, but also help us know how we can engage and serve others.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think I mean one of the things central to our project is how we can both read and see with generous and gracious eyes, kind of this idea of sacramental imagination, right? That God reveals himself in material things, but also maybe even like profane or dark things like the cross, right? Like he uses the
Hmm
death of his son to reveal himself maybe most powerfully. And so we've had some guests on to kind of defend contemporary modern art, abstract art, to say like a lot of Christians are like, I don't get it. I don't get what's going on here. We kind of first connected over a project we're working on theology and hip hop. Which is, surprising to everybody who can see my face as probably you. But we've kind of gathered this kind of great team of authors to kind of talk about hip hop and theology, and not kind of Christian hip hop, but people like Kendrick Lamar, or people like, I'm blanking on names that we've talked about.
Come on, find it. Come
Nas,
on.
Nipsey Hussle.
Nipsey Hussle. That's right. Yeah. So these people who some kind of identify with a redemptive theme, but some who don't. So for a Christian who thinks, man, I think I've struggled in my own kind of upbringing. I remember my parents being like, I listened to hip hop in middle school and high school, and then being like, what is this? And then coming to Christ later on and thinking about, like, how does hip hop fit into my interest? Should I like it? Should I just listen to kind of Christian hip hop? So I'm interested in kind of your take. How would you think about, I don't want to say defend, but just kind of describe how hip hop and theology can actually be a generative conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one level, there's a sense of like interest and care for communities that we're connected to, or that are adjacent to us. And so if there is a cry or an expression of art that's sustained from a community that is either connected to us, we're actually a part of it, either by geography or ethnicity or nationality, or we're next to it, it's like connected to us, then I think as Christians, that's something that we actually should listen to. Like, what are these people, what are people saying? What are they celebrating? What are they calling out for? What are they protesting? What are they longing for? So I think there's sort of like a neighborly disposition, like if the neighbors down the street started like a new really cool art form, and they sort of had these gatherings, and it was happening every Friday night, like it would be really strange for you as a neighbor to not be like, well, I should go listen in, like what's this all about? And I think in one sense, like if you're an American, like that's kind of what hip hop is, and it's dominated our culture, and it's permeated every other sort of arena of art and media, and musical genre, all sorts of things. So I think as Christians, not everyone's called to this, but if we're particularly interested in the arts and these sort of things, this is something for us to lean into, just out of a neighborly concern and interest. And there might be something that we could be taught there. I think at another level, there is, if we do believe that people are made in the image of God, there is going to be great expressions of art that are going to happen, and come from people who are not Christians, but they're just going to be making great stuff that's really interesting, stuff that we may not be able to receive all of it, but there's going to be things there that we're going to say, wow, this person might not realize this, but this is actually the working out of the gifts that God has given to them. And if we're going to draw from Augustine, there'll be some disordered loves there in the mix, but the gift, right, can still be seen and recognized. So I think those are a couple ways I would think about that. I think on a personal level, some of this, in terms of like how you listen or what somebody might listen to, I think that can be related to your own conscience, but also I think personally for me, related to my own growth in virtue and holiness. There are certain things that I actually listen to now that I listen to differently than I did in the past. Whereas in the past, if I were to be honest, I was listening in sort of like what's the right word? Sort of when you're participating secondhand. What's the big word for this, guys? My brain is going blank. What's that word?
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. It's a Friday afternoon. Everyone's tired.
Yeah.
I was participating secondhand. It's the big word for that. And I would sort of do that with different albums, right? And if I'm honest now, I can listen to those same things, and I listen in a different way. I listen with kind of like a curiosity. I can appreciate the art form. some of the lyrics, they actually kind of hurt me, even though at the same time they teach me, right? They pain me. They make me sad to hear that this is what somebody's gone through and this is what they're around. But I can appreciate the artistry, and I can hear different pockets of longing for something different, even in the midst of what, you look at the label is, parental advisory, explicit content, profane. So I think there's something in our own growth and holiness. Again, it's not for everybody, but I found this for myself where, I actually like engage with this genre in a different way than I did, as I was growing up. And I think that's hopefully evidence of, some of what you all are pointing to. And I think what some of y'all's work can actually instruct somebody in. So I think for those reasons, I think there's, in hip hop specifically, I think there is much that can be engaged and received well.
Just following up on that a little bit, like there's like for me, it was like my, if my parents found something with parental advisory, it was gone. I never asked where it went. But I think for me, it's like, instead of reaching for the radio dial and grabbing it and turning it off as quickly, helping, I guess I'm learning how to balance, what can they handle, and teaching them really how to think about things, like use it as an opportunity to be able to consider the stories of the person who's, and maybe even what they don't even know what they're longing for, but what they're longing for. How do you work through that? You're a father, right?
Yeah. I got 3 kids. Yep.
How do you deal with that with your kids?
I'm so helped by your comment because I'm dealing with this right now, especially in relation to hip hop. Like I love hip hop, and it's something, my oldest son is 12. And so it's something I want him to know. It's a part of our culture and it's important. And I think there's so many things he can learn from that. There's sort of like, I think there's a redemptive, there's, you can use the term a toxic masculinity. That's absolutely true of hip hop. There is a lot there that is really hellish. So I don't want him to learn that. At the same time, there are other things there that I do want him to learn, and I want him to be aware of. And I also want him to be able to be like, hey, I know that's a Nas album called Illmatic, and that's a really big deal. And it came out in 1994. Like, I actually want my son to know these things. So I've every time we're in the car, I'm thinking about this because he's like, hey, let's put some music on. I want to listen to this. And he loves to flip through Spotify and kind of find different things. And so I'm thinking about this with him actually very regularly. And so I found there are certain artists that I think they are telling stories as opposed to sort of maybe magnifying or sort of like glorifying things. I think there's a difference, and I'm not exactly sure how I could parse that out, but it's something that when I hear it, I can tell the difference. And so I'll often with him, if he's interested in something, we'll try to listen and then just kind of talk about it. But I think also at the same time, engaging with music in this way is a great way to learn vices too, where it's like, hey, this song is actually about this, which is pride. This is death. Like this is a exaltation of something that actually brings death. And so I think I just, like you mentioned, Gary, it does create a lot of room for conversation, because I hope that he'll have a framework to think about these things and to reflect on them, not just to receive them passively. So for example, we were listening to Damian Lillard, who's an NBA player, who's actually like a good rapper. And so my son thought this was so fascinating. So we listened to a few of his songs, and it was interesting to listen to songs where he's telling his story, kind of perseverance. And then he has other songs where it's sort of like, oh, okay, like you're just talking about, how you have so much more money than we'll ever have. It's like, okay, that's interesting. It's like, well, so I asked myself, it's like, what do you think about? You think about this song versus this song? Like, what do you notice? Like, what's interesting to you? What's he saying? And why do you think he's saying that? So I've found keeping that conversation open has so far seemed to be really fruitful, and I hope that's something that will continue.
Nice.
Good. Yeah, I think what you were saying earlier too about like your development in a genre, right? Like I first listened to hip hop because I liked the beats, and that was it, right? It's just kind of like totally consumeristic and passive. But then I saw, I think honestly, like Tupac and Green Day, where I think my first 2 albums I ordered from like the magazine that you used to order CDs from.
Yeah.
But then I saw like even in the person of Tupac, and there's this great HBO documentary on Tupac and his development, but like at the same time that he can be kind of like put out these Profane hit tracks. He's apologizing to his mom, right? And Dear Mama, and he's, wanting change at the same time that he's like a catalyst of violence. Like there's all of that in the one person. And I just feel like it's so extraordinary and redemptive and deep if we can kind of sit with it for a little bit. I'm curious. I know your chapter is on Kendrick Lamar and kind of this edited volume we're doing. Real quick off the cuff, what do you think about his new album?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great example of what you're just talking about there with Tupac. I think it's sort of a exaltation in his like triumph over all other rappers, and so he's sort of boasting and talking big and talking slick and doing some of the stereotypical stuff. And at the same time, there's sort of some introspection. And I think a good representation of that is the song that came out before the album was released, called Watch the Party Die. And he was sort of talking about how he has, all this beef and kind of talk about, violence and these different sort of things and rap rivalries, specifically in relation to him and Drake. It's sort of empty, and it needs to stop. And he has a couple of lines where he basically says, like, I wonder, he basically asks the question, I wonder what Jesus would do, and he asked that by referring to a couple Christian rappers, like, what would Lecrae do? What would this guy D1 do? And it's interesting because I think it represents both what you're talking about in relation to Tupac, who obviously is inspiration for Kendrick. This sort of, you see the kind of the saint and the sinner dynamic, right? That's like exists inside of, every human heart. And you can see him sort of trying to process some of that. And so I think you see that in spots on the new album. And so I think musically it's really good. I think in terms of what he's kind of exploring, it seems like he's still at the mountaintop, kind of like exalting in his victory. And it'll be interesting to see what comes after this, because as we know, just from, knowing human condition, you can get to the top and get everything you want. And then, what happens then? So I'm really curious for somebody like Kendrick, who seems to be a really grounded person. It'll be interesting to see what he produces after this. So yeah, last comment would be it's fun when big artists release things, because it does become a rare cultural moment for like a broad community. So it was really neat to see everybody talking about the same thing, rather than the internet splitting us up into these small little silos and communities. Sure. So I think there's something there that even in the creating of his art and releasing it, that I think is really beautiful, because it brought a lot of different people together. So I think on that level, I was happy to see it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Vicariously,
that's the word. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So now everyone that's listening right now can stop shouting at their phones.
That was the word. That was it. Yep.
There we go.
Friday afternoon. I guess I'm running on empty. Vicariously. That was the word. That's right.
I feel like I just lost about 10 pounds off my shoulders. All right. So doesn't take much. What's something you've interacted with recently? Maybe it goes back to some of the things you've already said, but that's really moved you. Maybe a particular song, visual art, or even something that you're reading. Anything that's particularly moved you in a special way?
Yeah, I would give, I would say music wise, I was just like perusing different end of the year lists. And so I came to some work from an artist named Jess Ray. And she's got an album that has some kind of interpretations of the Psalms, and in particular, she has one song called "Humble Heart," which is just really, really wonderful. Sort of in the Sandra McCracken, I would say, kind of vein. Kind of simple but powerful singer-songwriter. So her song "Humble Heart" was really stirring to me. Really, really simple but really beautiful. So I'm interested to check out more of her stuff heading into the new year. So shout out to everybody who does those end of year lists, because for folks like me who may kind of slide in and out of listening to music regularly, is a great way to catch up on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Nice.
All right. The last question we ask, we give you the last word. So we want to kind of help artists who call themselves Christians think about their art and other art forms. So what's something you'd want to share with them?
I guess my encouragement or what I would want to share would be maybe something around just, and you may have it or have it already, and if you do, rejoice in it. But find other artists and be in community with them, and support each other, grow together, find a way to share the spiritual life together and the artistic life, because they're connected. And then also, as you do that, be patient and enjoy the process of what God will bring out of that. So I'm reminded of that talking to some of my artist friends, of just how life-giving it is to be in a community of artists who are sort of moving on the same trajectory, and how when you have that, you're really able to keep going. So that would be my encouragement. Seek that out. If you have it, rejoice in it. If you don't, seek it, pray for it, and trust that the Lord would bring that sort of goodness into your orbit.
Awesome.
It's good.
Reverend Claude Atcho, thanks for being here, man. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, great to be with y'all. Appreciate the invitation.